I hope we will engage two of the preeminent experts on the subjects addressed so thoughtfully in this volume that Steve RADEMAKER participated in as one of the commissioners, The World at Risk, the report of the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism. I will just introduce both of them very briefly, then we'll have a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll open it up to those of you in the audience. If you would please, if you haven't already done so, turn off your cell phones. At such point as we invite you to pose questions, which are to be preferred over statements, please do so at the microphones. When you do so, please identify yourself, both by name and affiliation, if any. I'm thrilled to have our two colleagues here. Both of them braved the ardors of Washington weather, which I guess is headed here tonight. That always makes life interesting, especially when you're doing it by air. Steve, I think I'll start with you as the duty commissioner present today. Senator Jim Talent, who we had intended to have with us, was obliged to be in Missouri and could not make that trip without the weather problem interfering with it, so he had to scratch at the last minute, but we're very pleased to have you here. Steve is, as you have in the bios, both a practitioner of the business of national security of great distinction, having served in a number of capacities, both in the Congress and in the executive branch, most recently as an assistant secretary in the Department of State, responsible for many of the efforts that have been made to date to find ways to control the very threats that he and his fellow commissioners described in this rather daunting assessment. He has currently a gig in the private sector, but he continues in a variety of capacities, some partnerships with us to contribute, and we're very, very pleased to have you with us, Steve. Thank you for both this particular service and your collected service of the past several decades. FRAN Townsend, I suspect all of you know, by virtue of nothing else of her most recent government service, namely as Homeland Security Advisor to President Bush, a job she finished up shortly before the end of the administration and served in with great distinction for several years. Capping service with the Coast Guard, where she was an assistant commandant for intelligence, a number of positions in the Justice Department, including senior levels of the department, and as an assistant U.S. attorney here in the Southern District of New York. She, too, knows the business that we're talking about intimately and has, I think, contributed considerably to the remarkable record of the Bush administration in having prevented a number of attempted attacks and I think perhaps dissuaded others during the 7 years that followed 9/11. So we're very grateful to you, Fran, for both, again, that service and for being here today. I would like to start this conversation with perhaps the obvious question. The problems of biological warfare and the prospects that nuclear technology, which is somewhat harder to come by than the biological agents that are unfortunately probably increasingly accessible to terrorists, is an important problem, but in a way it's a symptom of a larger problem. And you address in a variety of places here, including in your recommendations, the importance of dealing with the underlying ideology, I think is the term you use to describe the force animating terrorism. And I'd be very interested in both of you responding to the following proposition, and that is that unless we're clear what the ideology is, it's very hard to diagnose an antidote, whether it's soft power, as you've emphasized, needs to be used here, or more traditional hard power means. In fact, it's argued by many of us that if you fail to identify it in terms that I think are appropriate, and I'll just throw them out for your consideration, namely as a practice, a theopolitical legal program, if you will, that authoritative Islam has called Sharia. You're not going to be able either to, again, understand what is animating these folks and their determination to kill as many of us as they can and destroy our country and for that matter others if they can, let alone devise appropriate countermeasures. So could both of you speak to, from the perspective of the Commission, or in your case, Fran, the perspective of somebody who wrestled with what we call this thing, how do we avoid giving undue offense and so on, how do we get our hands around what is animating these people and describe it clearly enough to the American people that they can help us counter it?
Well, first of all, I don't want to sound like an apologist for Islamic terrorism, but in our approach to this problem, it was our view that Islamic terrorism may be the most prominent manifestation and today the biggest threat facing us in this area, but the problem goes beyond Islamic terrorism and its ideology. The Murrah building in Oklahoma City was destroyed by terrorists who were not Islamic fundamentalists. The Aum Shinrikyo cult in Tokyo that carried out a weapons of mass destruction attack in the Tokyo subways was motivated by an ideology that was not Islamic fundamentalism. And our view is that people who are prepared to carry out these kinds of attacks, whether they're Islamists or subscribe to some other angry ideology that leads them to want to strike out, typically want to make the biggest possible statement they can. And the bigger the better. And if they can get their hands on weapons of mass destruction, that will enable them to make the biggest statement of all. So with one exception, I don't think we really dealt specifically with Islamic fundamentalism. We dealt instead with the problems of weapons of mass destruction and the technologies associated with them, and how can we reduce the risks that they would fall into the hands of terrorists of any stripe. The one exception where I think we did focus particularly on this problem was in our treatment of Pakistan, where we saw an emerging situation that it's an instance where the problem seems to be getting worse rather than better. And so there we did speak to some policy measures that we would recommend to try and, the term we use among ourselves, I'm not sure it made its way into the report, but to drain the swamp, to address the conditions that are giving rise to Islamic terrorism both in Afghanistan and in northern Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. But again, just to amplify on this point, if taking your point that there are other bad actors out there, if the problem at the end of the day at the moment is, for example, Pakistan, can you really get at the wellspring, if you will, of the swampish, festering stew without coming to grips with what is clearly animating the worst in Pakistan at the moment? And I think that is this sort of Sharia program. Fran, what's your sense?